During his studies, he makes note of the fact that not one well-documented source states specifically that the ark came to rest precisely on Mount Ararat. However, the Bible does state in Genesis 8:4 that the ark came to rest in the mountains, that's plural, mountains of Ararat. Could it be that the ark came to rest on a smaller sister mountain of Ararat proper? Have well-intending prior expeditions searched Ararat only because it is the highest point in the area, and as a result, overlooked and neglected other possible landing sites of the ark? Point by point, Ron begins to build a case for the possibility of the ark not being on Mount Ararat proper. Due to these conclusions drawn from his extensive research, he is more intrigued than ever concerning the possibilities of the site, which was explored and summarily abandoned by the 1960 expedition.
In 1977, Ron Wyatt made his first trip to this area. It was during this first trip that Ron found numerous huge Drogue-style anchor stones, all the same approximate size as the one here. These were all in direct alignment with the boat-shaped object, evidencing their being cut loose or dropped as the ark entered the area of its final rest. These bear ancient iconographic inscriptions of the 8 survivors of the flood. In December of 1978, an earthquake in this highly remote area dropped the soil from around the formation, allowing Ron to see for the first time the rib timbers and deck support timbers visibly exposed on the side. A large crack was also formed along the entire length of the object, and he was able to measure the depth and take samples for analysis. Ron saw a very large rock which had crosses carved on it. About 10 feet in height, this stone had a hole on one end. Ron remembered seeing similar objects in an archaeology book that were anchor stones used on ancient ships in the Mediterranean Sea, but this one was many, many times larger. When their guide saw Ron's excitement at seeing this, he showed them several other similar stones in and around his village. Most of them had 8 crosses carved on them in the Byzantine and Crusader styles. For the first time, Ron realized the possibility that the ark had used such anchors, not for anchoring the ship, but for stabilizing it and holding the nose into the oncoming waves. The crosses on these stones were of the style of ancient Christian Byzantines and Crusaders who were well known for carving crosses on objects they associated with biblical events and places. Did these early Christians connect these stones with the 8 survivors of the flood? The next day, Ron and the boys again began to walk the region. This time they came upon an ancient stone house, partially collapsed. Its great age could be seen by the fact that the ground level around it had been raised several feet by eroding soil from the surrounding hills. Extending out in all directions around the house was a system of stone fences, also almost buried with only their tops extending above the ground. But most interesting were the 2 stones sitting beside the house, one standing and one lying flat. These also had 8 crosses carved on their faces, but the crosses were carved on top of some earlier pictographs. There was what appeared to be an arch across the top, which Ron believes was a rainbow. Below this were 8 figures walking away from an ocean wave shape, above which sat a boat shape. On the stone lying on the ground, the second figure from the right was a woman. Her head was bowed and her eyes were closed. On the standing stone, both the first figure, which was a man, and the second figure, a woman, both had their eyes closed and their heads bowed. Ron drew an incredible conclusion. He believed these were possibly the tombstones marking Noah and his wife's graves. The wife, he concluded, had died first, and that is why only she was represented with her eyes closed on her stone. When Noah died, his eyes were shown as closed as well as were his wife's. Nearby was a natural amphitheater between two hills with a large stone that appeared to be an altar. Could this possibly be Noah's post-flood home with corrals for breeding various animals and an altar directly behind his house? These were exciting discoveries, but they still hadn't found the boat-shaped object. Finally, the last afternoon they were there, Ron left the boys reading while he made one last search. This time he had the taxi drive in a different direction, south of where they had earlier been. When the taxi had gone as far as it could, he began to walk through the mountains. After a while, he saw the boat-shaped formation directly below him.
In determining precisely where to begin his investigations, Ron approaches the matter differently than his ark-hunting predecessors. Instead of focusing his search on Mount Ararat, he began with a broader scope of vision. He feels strongly that an occasion as momentous as the landfall of Noah's Ark would be made record of in history and ancient legend by local inhabitants of the region. His insight and intuition were to pay off handsomely. He began by visiting and talking to villagers in the general proximity of the boat-shaped object. After several days of becoming acquainted with them and earning their trust, he gets the needed directions to the general area he has awaited so long to visit. At long last, here is the object which has held his fascination for so many years.
And here we are at last, gazing upon the mortal remains of the great boat that Noah and his family rowed to safety.
The site is located approximately 15 miles south of Mount Ararat and is known locally as Doomsday Mountain. The elevation is approximately 6,375 feet above sea level. Ron takes the dimensions of the object and finds it to be approximately 515 feet in length. His data corresponds with the original aerial photo survey and ground measurements which were made by both the Turkish and American teams. The local villagers who have come to know and trust Ron are familiar with every stone, boulder, and canyon of their land. Once again, directions they provide him with lead him to a remarkable series of discoveries. He finds 3 massive anchor-type stones, all approximately 8 feet high and weighing several tons each. All are similar in proportion and design and have 8 distinct crosses which are carved in the stone in a pattern which Ron and other experts believe refer to the 8 survivors of the flood. The placing and alignment on the stones tell of their relationship to Noah and one another. This is called an iconographic representation. Ron elaborates.
Like all the other grave markers in this area, the Valley of the Eight, this marker once had 8 crosses. Now these are a beautiful representation of the ornate Byzantine cross dating back to approximately the 3rd century AD. The large cross representing Noah is especially ornate. The one representing his wife is quite a beautiful design. Now we have the matched pairing here, the eldest son and his wife. These crosses are of the ornate style. We have this cross here that represents one of the sons beyond the first son, and it matches with this one. Up here we have the representation of the other son, but the representation, or the cross representing his wife, is missing and apparently got broken away over the years. The alignment of these stones tell us the direction from which the boat came as it approached and the mountain that it landed on. One of these stones is approximately a quarter of a mile from the boat itself. Now, these stones, or this type anchor stone, is a very familiar object to the students of early navigation. They were used by many of the early civilizations, the Phoenicians in particular, and the shores of the Mediterranean and the floor of the Mediterranean is strewn with these stones. The difference that becomes obvious immediately is the difference in size.
These giant pierced stones are similar to ancient anchor stones used in the Mediterranean for centuries and millennia. These pierced stones are like the large Bronze Age stone anchors from the Mediterranean. Tall, broad when viewed from the side.
Ron then took them to see the anchor stones in the village as well as the old stone house and the tombstones. But when they arrived at the house, they found it reduced to rubble and the tombstones gone. Where the tombstones had once rested was now a hole partially refilled. Ron was devastated. From that point on, he was very careful not to draw attention to anything of interest for fear of it being destroyed or removed.
Looks like that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 5, and 1, 2, 3, 4. This one's got 14. Undoubtedly, well, here's the Central Cross that they're going by, of course. And it's difficult to tell which were the originals and which are the extra ones that have been added later. But here you have 5, a little one here, 3 more here, and here. And then this one matches with this one. There's more here. So we have 5 down here, 5 up here, and 4 over here. So the extras were undoubtedly added at a later time, and you can see there's also been some damage in terms of target practice.
Right.
Now this gives you a nice idea of the height of some of these stones, and it also gives you a nice idea of the location of the hole at the top of the rock. This rock also has the crosses carved in it. They're a little harder to see because of the ridges in the rock, and the natural ridges in the rock. But if you look carefully, there are a number of places. Here's a good example. Here's another example, and here's the bottom of the bigger one. Bigger cross comes across here. So probably if you could examine it more carefully and changing lighting, you would see all of them. And undoubtedly, this stone probably was also standing up. And you'll notice that the distribution of the crosses seems to be lower in the rock, on the base of the rock, lower down to the bottom part of where it would have been upright.
When Ron and Dave arrived, Samran was ill, and they had to delay their departure to eastern Turkey until he felt better. During this time, Mine Unler arranged for them to meet with Dr. Ekrem Arkugal, Turkey's leading archaeologist, world-renowned for his excavations of the Hittite Empire in Turkey. Familiar with both Ron's research and the reports of the Turkish scientists from the fall of 1984, Dr. Arkugal made the following statement.
May I congratulate you for that great success, really.
Thank you, sir.
I believe it is an ancient remains of an old ship.
This, since the earthquake pushed it up, the wood, you see, is eroding out, and it must be covered quickly also, because we're losing much.
It must be preserved. It must be preserved. These are the remains, which are at any rate remains of a ship.
Yes.
On June 20th, 1987, after 10 years of intense research, the Turkish government announced to the world the discovery of Noah's Ark and the dedication of it and the surrounding area as a national park.
What Wyatt found measures almost identically to the text offered in the 6th chapter of Genesis in the Old Testament. It was also found in the area where the Bible says the ark finally came to rest.
What we actually have found is physical evidence that this is a boat. Whether or not it's Noah's Ark is up to the people that review the material. That's up to them to decide on that. My personal feeling is that it is Noah's Ark.
Wyatt admits his skeptics are severe, and he has a long road to travel before his theories can be totally tested. The rock, wood, and metal samples are currently being analyzed, with reports due on the specimens by mid-September. If it is the Ark, what has been proven?
To the people that believe in God, this will be a confirmation of their faith.
Wyatt firmly believes ultimately his find will be proven to be that of Noah's Ark. Even then, he says, there'll be some who still won't believe it. As far as the timing of this find, he has an explanation.
But I think everything is on a time schedule, and I believe that when the time is right, these things will be brought out.
Welcome to Wyatt Archaeological Museum here in Cornersville, Tennessee. I'm Richard Reeves, president of Wyatt Archaeological Research. I'd like to invite you to join me as we review the discoveries of Ron Wyatt and the ongoing investigations of Wyatt Archaeological Research. Here in the museum, we have artifacts from around the world relating to the discoveries of Noah's Ark, Sodom and Gomorrah, the Red Sea crossing site, and Mount Sinai in Arabia, as well as information on the Ark of the Covenant and how the pyramids were built. So what I'd like to do is invite you to join me as I share the things that I've learned and seen over the past 10 years as I've worked with Ron Wyatt. And the rain was upon the earth 40 days and 40 nights. The reason I point that out, I'm sure they were terribly rough and turbulent seas. You're going to see some giant anchor stones. These are not anchors that would anchor a ship down, but rather to drag in the water, stabilize the ship, and keep the nose into the oncoming waves. These are called Drogue-style anchors, and we'll take a closer look at those in just a minute. And then in Genesis 8:4, it says, "And the ark rested in the 7th month, the 17th day of the month, upon the mountains of Ararat." Mountains, plural. And if you go back to the Hebrew text, it actually says the mountains of Urartu, which is that whole mountainous region over in eastern Turkey. This is a map of Urartu. This is the northern area of the Tigris and Euphrates River. Mount Ararat is in the central part of Urartu. The place that Ron found Noah's Ark is actually about 20 miles south of that. Now, on September 5th, 1960, Life magazine did an article, and it showed a boat-shaped object that had been aerially photographed with a caption, "Noah's Ark," and a question mark. Ron Wyatt saw this in Life magazine, and he wanted to check it out, but he had to do a little research and save a little money before he could do it. So later in 1977, Ron went back over to eastern Turkey and located what he had seen in the magazine. And as you can see the outline of a boat. And at that time, the matrix material or the surrounding material was all the way up to the gunnels, if you will, of the boat-shaped object. On November 25th, 1978, there was an earthquake in the area, 4.4 magnitude, and it was located, the center of the earthquake was located in the Dogubayazit, which is about 10 miles from the boat site. So Ron was very concerned about what the earthquake may have done to the ark, and he made a trip back over to see, what had happened. When he got there, he couldn't believe his eyes. The earthquake had dropped the surrounding material, the matrix material, away from the boat and left it sitting there. He could see the rib timbers down the sides, the vertical and horizontal deck support timbers, and other boat shapes. So what had happened is God had excavated it more than a few minutes than people could have in years. These are rib timbers on the sides. You can measure between them. They're evenly spaced. So this is not a natural object. This is something that's man-made, and the Turkish scientists agree. Now, these are horizontal deck support timbers. You can see 3 of them here in this picture. They run across and connect with a rib timber. So you have a horizontal deck support timber and a rib timber, a horizontal deck support timber and a rib timber, a horizontal deck support timber and a rib timber, and so on. This is not a natural object. Ron located giant anchor stones. We talked a little bit about that before, and these are Drogue-style anchors. They're found in the Mediterranean. The only difference in these and the ones found in the Mediterranean is the size. But we have to remember that it was only in the late 1800s that anyone ever built a boat again the size of Noah's Ark. Now, if you'll notice the hole in the top of the anchor stone, on one side it's smaller than the other. The idea is you tie a knot on a big rope and feed it through till it catches on the small side. Of course, the other side is bigger, but in the middle it gets even bigger. And the idea is when the rope is wet, it swells up in the middle and keeps it from wearing in two. And you can see in the background Mount Ararat back behind the anchor stone. And many of these have been found in a line leading right up to the boat-shaped structure, which we know now is Noah's Ark that Ron found. The fossilized deck timber that we have in the museum was presented to Ron by the Turkish government. As he was doing the subsurface radar, he located this piece of timber. The Turkish government actually dug it up and presented it to Ron for analysis. This is a picture of the inside of the deck timber, and if you'll notice, it has layers in it. And in some of the languages, gophering refers to layering. There's in the Oxford English Dictionary, it will tell you that gophering is sometimes lapping or layering. And of course, you can see the layers in the fossilized wood there. This layering can actually refer to gophering, or gophering can refer to layering. And the fossilized timber here is layered. So we think that could have to do with gophering. Some people think that the Hebrew word for gopher came from the word that represents cypress. And people that have a look at it seem to think it may be some type of cypress. It says, make thee an ark of gopher wood. In Genesis 2, 5, and 6, we're told that a mist went up from the earth and watered the whole face of the ground. So it didn't rain back before the flood like it does now. The reason I point that out is that the fossilized timber that has been found has no growth rings in it. This is another piece of fossilized timber from a different location. And we've already talked about the absence of growth rings. Growth rings are caused by wet and dry seasons, but the Bible says before the flood a mist went up from the ground and watered the face of the earth. So it just didn't rain back before the flood, and growth rings are caused by wet and dry seasons. This is a piece of animal antler. I'm not sure exactly what kind of animal, but you can see from the root of it here that it is definitely some type of antler. That came from within the structure of the ark. And this is a coprolite. It's a petrified animal dropping. And you can tell from analysis that it has the characteristics of animal droppings. It's been petrified. The plant life before the flood was much, much different. People would like to tell us that everything's always remained the same. But in a book by the name of Life in the Paleozoic, it gives us some examples of plant life before the flood. It speaks of the giant club moss, Sigillaria, and Lepidodendron. It says they were the main inhabitants of the Carboniferous forest, and they raised their turfs of leaves 60 to 100 feet above the ground. Their modern descendants reduced to heights of only a few inches. So things are different now than they were before the flood. To support trunks of 6-foot base diameters and 60 to 100-foot height, tissues must have increased in thickness from year to year. There was, as we have already said, secondary bark and wood similar to that of modern trees, but lacking the spring and winter rings, which correspond to seasonal alternation of moisture and dryness. This is further proof that the Carboniferous climate was fairly uniform. Now, these are people that believe in evolution, and they're telling us that back before the flood, wood did not necessarily have growth rings in it. Again, the name of the book is Life in the Paleozoic. Now, things, again, were different before the flood. We know that Adam lived 930 years, that Methuselah lived longer than that. And as you see here in the graph, the lifespan of humans decreased drastically after the flood, and we come all the way down to the time of Moses. Moses lived to be 120 years. So once again, things were much different before the flood. We have the flood here at 2348 BC, and we base that on the fact that you can add up the ages of the people in the Bible. If you go by Genesis 5 and 11 and other scripture, we know when they were born, when they died, how long they lived, and you can calculate the date of the flood, and it's around 2348 BC. The gigantism in the fossil record. It seems that before the flood, there were 11.5-foot tall kangaroos, 11-foot tall camels, 10-foot tall deer with 12-foot antler spans, and so on. And this is the fashion which thou shalt make it of, The length of the ark shall be 300 cubits, the breadth of it 50 cubits, and the height of it 30 cubits. So this tells us that Noah's ark was 300 cubits long. This is a diagram of what Ron found over in eastern Turkey. As you can see, the boat has splayed. Every ancient ship that's ever been found, as it decays, the sides fall out and the top collapses in. So what Ron could do is measure the depth of debris and determine what the top of the boat looked like. But the bottom, the keelson and everything are still there. Again, using laser measurement, he measured 300 royal Egyptian cubits. In Acts 7, it tells us that Moses was learned in all the wisdom of the Egyptians and was mighty in words and in deeds. The royal Egyptian cubit, which was 20.6 inches. We took a tour group over to eastern Turkey to have a look at the boat, and while looking around there, Ron found a fossilized rivet. What's interesting about the rivet, it has aluminum, silicon, titanium, iron, and magnesium in it. And these are things that are found in what we would call space-age alloys. We had these analyzed, and they say we've only known how to make this for the past 50 or 75 years. But in Genesis 4:22, we're told that Tubal-Cain was an instructor of every artificer in brass and iron. And of course, brass is an alloy. So we really shouldn't be surprised to find that Noah knew all about metals. When we had these things analyzed in the laboratory, the rivet, they had a little side note and said, it is interesting to note that Section 1, presumably fossilized timber members, was found to contain much higher carbon than Location 2, presumably fossilized metal. And that's exactly what you should find in a fossilized rivet. The wood around it would have more carbon because only living things have organic carbon, and of course the metal would not. And that's what they found. In 1991, we'd gone over and taken a tour group, but Ron brought the rest of the group. It was 25 or 30 people up the backside of the ark. It's a little gentler slope. It's not as hard to climb up that way to the ark. And while they were on their way up there, Ron spotted this object. And in the presence of about 25 or 30 people, Ron picked this up. And if you'll notice, what it seems to be is a petrified rivet. In other words, this is petrified wood, but here you have the rivet. The washer measures about 3 or 3.5 inches, and the center part is about 1.5 inches, I think. But anyway, Ron walked over and handed this to me, and when I saw it, I couldn't believe my eyes. But you can see the washer here and the head of the rivet here. We've had this analyzed, and the analysis revealed that it is what we would call space-age alloys. It has magnesium, titanium, aluminum, and other elements in it that make up a highly sophisticated alloy. So this is not natural. In Genesis chapter 4, it talks about a man named Tubal-Cain. It says he was an instructor of every artificer of iron and brass. So he knew all about alloys generations before Noah. And again, the scientists tell us that we've only known how to make this kind of alloy for the past 50 or 75 years. Now these are some other specimens here. Up above where the boat sits, there's sea fossils all over the top of the mountain. You can see, and this one is actual seashell still left in there. And I probably picked up 100 or so of these fossils and, threw down most of them to pick up these good ones. But there are hundreds and thousands of fossils, probably about 200 feet up above where the boat sits in the mountains of Ararat. This other piece seems to be a piece of petrified coral. You can see the holes in it. And again, this is up above where the boat sits on top of the mountain. And of course, the Bible tells us that all the mountains were covered at least 15 cubits deep in water. Now, one thing that people look for in the way of telling if something was wood is organic carbon. And this is a piece that I picked up from the site. You may be able to see the carbon shining in it. I don't know where you can see that or not. But anyway, we had it cut in the laboratory. This is where this smooth cut is where it was sectioned for analysis. And it did reveal high carbon content. So once again, this is not just a rock. It used to be wood and is now petrified. Now, that brings us to the point of radiocarbon dating. It's all based on assumptions, and we're not told that. The assumption is that things have always been the same, that radiocarbon has always been produced at the same rate, it has always been absorbed at the same rate, and that it has always decayed at the same rate. But conclusions based on assumption must not be regarded as fact. We need to check things out. The Bible says to prove all things and hold fast that which is good. Now, the way radiocarbon is produced, cosmic radiation coming in from outer space bombards elements in the upper atmosphere, producing radiocarbon, or what we know as C14. This radiocarbon combines with oxygen and forms carbon dioxide, which is absorbed in the photosynthesis process by plants, and of course then animals eat the plants. And what the scientists do, they try to measure how much radiocarbon is left in a material and determine how old it was. And this is fairly accurate back to the time of the flood. But before that, things were so much different, it's very inaccurate. Another consideration is that atmospheric conditions are different now than before the flood. The equivalent of an additional 4 inches of water vapor in the upper atmosphere would almost stop the production of radiocarbon because it blocks the cosmic radiation coming in, the free neutrons. They're almost completely stopped by 4 inches of water vapor. Another thing we're not told is that our geomagnetic fields around the Earth are going away in half-lives of less than 1,500 years. And some people think less than 800 years. So 1,500 years ago, we had twice the protection from the cosmic radiation that we've been talking about. 3,000 years ago, 4 times as much. So the radiocarbons would just not have been produced at the same rates. Based on Genesis 5 and 11 and the biblical statement that he which made them at the beginning made them male and female, the creation of all things took place approximately 6,000 years ago, not billions of years ago. In 2 Peter chapter 3, it says, knowing this first, that there shall come in the last days scoffers walking after their own lust, and saying, where is the promise of his coming? For since the fathers fell asleep, all things continue as they were from the beginning of the creation. And this is what the people do that are evolutionists. They think that things have always been the same. But we know from the Bible that they have not. Now, a hole was bored into one side of the boat, and matrix material was pulled out. We had this analyzed in one of the top crime labs in the country, and they identified various fibers. The one you see here is a animal fiber or animal hair that was identified as fur hair from the cat family, not the long hair, but the short fur hair underneath. It has a single cellular medulla center section, and it has color banding from the root to the tip. And they immediately identified this as fur hair from the cat family. These are various plant fibers that have not been identified, but it's apparent that they are definitely plant fibers. Now remember, these are microscopic. The scientists were amazed when they saw this. They said if we saw this in evidence, we would say that it is a man-made fiber. And again, they pulled this out of the matrix material that came from that hole. What was happening is the light from the microscope was being absorbed into the fiber and transmitted out the end. You can see the light coming out of the end. And this is typical of fiber optics. And this came right out of Noah's Ark. Yes, Noah's Ark has been found. This is a picture of Ron Wyatt with the governor of the province of Ari. Mount Ararat in Turkish is Ari Dağ. And this is making it official that Noah's Ark has been found. And Ron is presented with a picture and given credit for the discovery. The Turkish newspaper Hurriyet ran an article at that time, and it said Nuh'un Gemisi, and it talks about tourism, that it's open for tourism. Now, the word Nuh'un Gemisi in Turkish means Noah's big boat. So they officially recognize the discovery of Noah's Ark. The article said, at Uzangli village, which is 15 kilometers from Dogubayazit, Turkish scientists and Mr. Ronald Eldon Wyatt and his team from the United States researched the area. They took samples of the earth. The test results was that the soil has iron and fossil boat structures. Scientists confirmed Noah's Ark is at Uzangli village. And again, this is Turkey's leading newspaper, Hurriyet. Now, a lot of people say, well, what do the professional archaeologists say? Ekrem Arkagal is Turkey's most famous archaeologist. For years and years, people said that you can prove that the Bible's not true because no one's ever found anything that refers to the Hittites. But Mr. Arkagal, as he was digging in the area of north-central Turkey, found the ancient city of Bogoskoy and vast Hittite civilizations. Mr. Arkagal, when reviewing the evidence, says it is a ship, an ancient ship, and it must be preserved. So the Turkish archaeologists and scientists believe that what you're looking at is the remains of Noah's Ark. A visitor center has been built at the site. It's been declared a national treasure and a national park, and they have a security guard there 24 hours a day taking care of it. The things we've talked about paint a picture of God's judgment and also of salvation for people that will put their trust in Him. Just like Noah and the animals went in through the door of Noah's ark to safety, Jesus said, I'm the door. By me, if any man enter in, he shall be saved. And that's what's important to us, is to realize that we have a way of salvation too, and it's through Jesus Christ. We'd like to invite you to come and visit the museum here in Cornersville, Tennessee. We welcome groups. We have youth groups, senior citizens groups from time to time. If you'd like, I can come to your church and make this presentation and show you what I know about these sites. Again, we're located in Cornersville, Tennessee, about 60 miles south of Nashville, Tennessee, about 50 miles north of Huntsville, Alabama. If you need to call us, our phone number is 931-293-4745. Our email address is archaeology@united.net, and we have a museum website at wyattmuseum.com.
Образцов говорит о том, что это окаменевшее дерево. Начиная свои поиски, Рон беседует с жителями окрестных селений. Начинают раскрываться местные тайны. Это приводит Рона к ряду поразительных открытий. Он находит огромные якорные камни, каждый весом в несколько тонн. Все они одинаковы по форме и размеру и имеют отношение к Ноеву ковчегу. На этих камнях имеются высеченные иконографические изображения 8 крестов, которые, как полагает Рон, имеют отношение к 8 людям, пережившим потоп. Кроме того, вес и размер камней соответствуют размерам судна, указанным в Библии. Чтобы выжить при потопе, такие якорные камни были весьма необходимы ковчегу Ноя. Они служили для стабилизации и устойчивости судна при шторме. Местные жители сообщили Рону, что селение, неподалеку от которого находится один из камней, называется на местном наречии местом 8, а долина, где находится это селение, долиной 8. Ни один из местных жителей не знает, откуда произошли эти названия. Они издревле передавались из поколения в поколение. И снова здесь мы определенно находим указания на 8 человек, переживших потоп. Вдобавок к этим находкам, Рон обнаружил разрушенную стеллу с петроглифическими изображениями, датированными 3-м тысячелетием до нашей эры. На этой стелле были изображены фигуры летящей птицы, 8 человек внутри лодки и рисунок как раз той горной цепи, которая видна с места остановки Ноева ковчега. Вероятно, кто-то в древности установил эту стеллу в месте причаливания ковчега в знак спасения Ноя и его семьи. Наконец-то, загадки легендарной истории о Ноевом ковчеге начинают раскрываться. Наконец-то, Ноев ковчег найден.